Last weekend, the men at Mariners went on our kind of camping weekend, our camp out, looking at the weather outside. I'm so glad that it was last weekend and not this weekend. We would have been in a lot of trouble if it had been this weekend, wouldn't we, Darren? But we had a great time, and one of the things we did whilst we were there was we watched a film on the Saturday night, and we watched the film Gladiator. Hands up who's seen Gladiator? Quite a lot of people. Quite a famous movie. Those of you that are getting excited, Gladiator 2 is coming out in November, if you didn't know that already. I'm assuming it's a different Gladiator, because I won't spoil the ending of the first one, but it's unlikely that they're in it. But there's the kind of, it's such a famous movie, the famous lines that you get in Gladiator. One of the most famous lines in cinema, isn't it? My name is, no one knows it, Maximus Decimus Meridius, husband to a murdered wife, father to a murdered son, and I will have my vengeance in this life or the next. It's one of those kind of famous lines in cinema, isn't it? And it's this kind of true underdog story, the kind of the up and the down and the up again of this person in this story. And we love those stories of kind of the underdog, those person who's kind of like taking it, the odds are against them, everything is stacked against them. The tagline for Gladiator is the general who became a slave, the slave who became a gladiator, the gladiator who defied an emperor. And one of those kind of great lines, and that kind of thought of that underdog story, we'll probably have all got our favorite ones, whether it's a film or whether it's in literature of a story, or maybe it's in sport, our like favorite sports teams when they're up against kind of the best in the world, and we love it when the small guy wins and comes out on top, don't we? These kind of underdog stories, or whether it's someone who's on the up and they've got everything and then they lose it all, but then at the end they win the final fight or the final battle or whatever it is. These kind of outnumbered, against the odds, underdog stories. And this morning we're continuing our sermon series looking at these encounters with God throughout the Bible and what they're saying to us. And we're looking at that thought of encountering God in those moments when we are outnumbered, when we are overwhelmed, when we are against the odds. Last week, Emma shared on Gideon. She started to share on Gideon in Judges 6 in the Old Testament. And we're continuing with Gideon this week as we move through his story and this encounter with God. A bit of remembering for those of us that weren't here, even if we were here, probably some remembering as well. It's been a long week. But Gideon is down. Gideon is down and out. The Israelites are down and out. And they are down and out is because they are being battered constantly by the Midianites. The Midianites are the group, this tribe that live amongst kind of in the area. And it tells us in the Bible that they just constantly keep coming and ravaging the Israelite land. It says whenever something grows, whenever there is sustenance, whenever there is something good, the Midianites come and they take it away. And this has been going on year after year for 7 years. Whenever there is something good, whenever something starts to grow, whenever there is stuff, the Midianites come and they ravage and they just take it away from the Israelites. And they come constantly. And so we saw that Gideon was hiding away. You might remember that Emma shared that image of the wine press, this kind of sunken kind of structure where they would crush the wine. And we're told that Gideon is there, but he's not crushing wine, he's threshing the floor, which is meant to be done in the open, but he can't do it in the open, because if he does it in the open, the Midianites will come and they will destroy and they will take what they want. And so he's hiding away. The Israelites are hiding away because the Midianites just keep on coming. They are completely down and out. But then we get this shift in chapter 6, as Emma shared with us. There is a shift. They are on the up, and the up starts to come when they cry out to God. We sung one of the lines in those songs of, have you come to the end of yourself? The Israelites come to the end of themselves. They realize that they cannot do it themselves, that there is nothing that they can do, and so they cry out to God. And Gideon is called by God. And as this young guy is hiding away, God says that he is a mighty warrior. There is this wonderful kind of the irony and the prophetic at the same time. the irony of the current situation and the prophetic of what God sees and can do and is going to do and is calling Gideon to, this mighty warrior. And so he calls Gideon, and so Gideon has these doubts and he starts to question it and he's not sure, and so he starts to test God. And we have these famous episodes. He puts out kind of a fleece, and can the fleece be wet but all the ground around it dry, and then vice versa, etc. And he starts to test God. And we see him being built up as he receives this call from God. And he raises an army. He raises an army 32,000 men strong. And we see him growing as a leader, kind of growing before our eyes in this chapter, in chapter 6 of Judges. And so it ends on this note of optimism. There's kind of this wave of optimism that comes towards the end of the chapter, that Gideon is saying, this is how we're going to do it. We've had the Midianite army and they have been just ransacking and taking and ravaging for year after year, and we've been hiding away. But I've been called by God and I've raised this army, and we've got 32,000. This is how we're going to do it. We're going to take it to the Midianites. We're going to destroy them. This is what God is calling us to do. And there was this kind of moment where they've been on the down, and now we can see the up, and we can see the trajectory, and we can see the way that we're going. And then we get to chapter 7. If you've got your Bibles with you, you want to open it up. We've got nothing on the screens today. We're going old school. So if you've got Bibles with you, or if you've got your device and you want to get up the Bible, then we've got Judges chapter 7 is where we're looking at. And we're looking at these kind of 3 different encounters through this passage. And so the first bit is verses 1 to the beginning of verse 8. And this is where we are on this wave of optimism. This is how we're going to do it. This is Gideon's call, an army of 32,000. Early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all his men camped at the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me. My own strength has saved me. Now announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead." So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained. But the Lord said to Gideon, "There are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will thin them out for you there. If I say this one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say this one shall not go with you, he shall not go." So Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, "Separate those who lap the water with their tongues as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink." 300 of them drank from cupped hands, lapping like dogs. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home." So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites home, but kept the 300 who took over the provisions and trumpets of the others. There's the kind of sucker punch on this wave of optimism. We've got an army of 32,000. We are going to take the Midianites. This is how we're going to do it. And then, bam. We were on the up, and now we are down again. Gideon's army goes from 32,000 to 300 in a day. If you are having a bad day, just think about Gideon. His life falls apart in front of his eyes. The army is reduced not once, but twice. The first time it is reduced from 32,000 down to 10,000. 22,000 that are scared go home in the blink of an eye. That is it. They're too scared, they can go. And 22,000. Can you imagine Gideon as he watches the 22,000 men just begin to trudge off? He only had 32,000. He's raised this army, and he's done an incredible job. But it's a respectable number, but it's also a necessary number. The number of the Midianites numbers 135,000. He is against an army that is described as being thick as locusts. It's not just that they are like locusts where they come and they ravage the crops and they take everything, but they are as thick as locusts just for the sheer number of them. 135,000. 32,000 is surely the necessary number that we need. We cannot afford this, and it is cut by 2/3. Down to 10,000. Okay, we're down to 10,000. Surely all of the defense cuts have been made. Surely the budget is there. We can keep the 10,000. Now, no, those who go to the water and drink in a certain way are going to be cut. Whether it's going down and kind of, picking it up and kind of cupping it, or those that get right down and just get their face into the stream and drink. Some commentators kind of commentate and wonder as to why it was between those and those ones, whether it's because those that are kind of cupping are more cautious and they're more alert, so maybe they're better in the army, maybe whatever it is. I think the simple fact is that it was those that cupped because that was the least amount. That was the fewest amount. Just imagine the day for Gideon. He has put all of his energy into this. This is his calling. God has called him as a mighty warrior and given him a task, and he has done it. He has raised this army. He's put his energy, this is his calling. And in a day, he goes from 32,000 to 300. His life is in ruins. I wonder if you can relate at all. I wonder if you've had those moments where life is in ruins, where your life is falling apart in front of you. Maybe it's not outnumbered trying to raise an army, but maybe in those moments where you have felt so completely overwhelmed in life, so completely against the odds, whatever it is in life, whether it's in jobs, whether it's in relationships, whether it's financially, whatever there is, those moments where you get to the end of the day and you think, what has just happened? What has happened? This is what I put my energy into. This was my calling. This is what I was supposed to be doing, and it is failing. Well, what we see within this is God is shaping and molding Gideon. Gideon tested God in the previous chapter, and I think what we're seeing in some ways is the shoe is on the other foot, and God is testing Gideon. Everything is being stripped away. Now, it's not that whenever we face something like that, when our life is in ruins, it's because God is testing us. Sometimes God does. Sometimes God will be testing us. Other times, our life just falls apart because that's what sometimes happens in life. It's not that God has caused it. It's not that God is testing us. But even in those moments, God may be shaping us and molding us. Everything is being stripped away. I believe that for us as Mariners, as a church, we have been in that season that God has been stripping things away and stripping things back. But now they are completely outnumbered. It was outnumbered by 100,000. Now they're outnumbered 134,700. Completely outnumbered, completely overwhelmed. This is my calling. This is what I'm meant to be doing. And I've raised this army, and this is what we're going to do. And we're going to beat them. And we're going to destroy the Midianites. And God says, nah, we're going to do this a completely different way. And so we come to this next encounter as we follow on in the story, Judges 7. We pick up in verse 8 and we go down to verse 15. Now the camp of Midian lay below him in the valley. During that night the Lord said to Gideon, "Get up, go down against the camp, because I am going to give it into your hands. If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Afterwards you will be encouraged to attack the camp." So he and Purah, his servant, went down to the outposts of the camp. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the other eastern peoples had settled in the valley, thick as locusts. Their camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. I had a dream, he was saying. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. His friend responded, "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he bowed down and worshipped. He returned to the camp of Israel and called out, "Get up, the Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands." And so we come to this next part. We've had the down, we've had the up, we've had the down again, this completely outnumbered army. And now we have the aha moment. Gideon gets it. Gideon begins to understand. We are still down. We are still outnumbered. The battle is still ahead. But he is forced to realize it's not going to be about him. It's not going to be about his impressiveness. It's not going to be about his power. It's not going to be about his status. It's not going to be in his own strength. He has a fresh revelation of what God is doing. Joyce Meyer says, God chooses to use and promote those who know they are nothing without him and who give him the glory and the credit for all their accomplishments. He gets down and worships God. Still outnumbered, still with the battle ahead. 135,000 against 300. He gets on his knees and he worships because he's been invited into this deeper relationship. He has this fresh revelation as he goes. And can you imagine as he goes down and God says, if you're still afraid, go down and have a look. And so clearly he's afraid because he goes down and he has a look. And you can imagine this army just laid out before him, thick as locusts. And as he's there, terrified and afraid and completely outnumbered, he hears of this dream where this army, as he looks out in front of him, completely covering as far as they can see, is destroyed by a mere bread roll. He's being invited into a deeper relationship and intimacy with God. Tim Mackey says, maybe God's biggest priority isn't giving us exactly what we want, but shaping us into mature followers of Christ. Deep roots of faith and hope and patience and virtue and character. And so to accomplish that, he promises to be with us, not to be a genie in a bottle. And he goes on to challenge, could it be that it all falling apart is the most gracious thing God has ever done for Gideon? It doesn't mean that God is causing the falling apart, perhaps, in our own lives that we experience. I know from our own story, and those of you that know us and what we have traveled with our middle child who has a heart condition, and we've been through surgeries and gone through the ups and the downs and what life looks like and been through those moments that you never want to experience. Did God cause it? No. But are we completely changed through it? Has God shaped us and molded us in it? Absolutely. And of course, there are moments where Susanna and I don't say this, but we say it regularly to each other that actually we wouldn't have it any other way. That what God has done in and through us, we can see has only been done through that situation that we've traveled. And God works and continues to work through it. Even only yesterday, my wife Susanna was having a conversation with someone where she got to share this journey on what God is doing and has done. I wonder if you have experienced that. Gideon has this season of preparation, this molding and shaping. He realizes it's not going to be in his strength. It'll be God working behind the scenes, God bringing things about. Gideon grasps that concept that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 1, 27 and 29. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong, so that no one may boast before him. The Israelites are not going to be allowed to boast that it's in their own strength. It's going to be God that does it. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me." He has this fresh revelation. He's invited to hear this dream. And he realizes what's required from him is obedience and trust and faith. And so he gets on his knees to worship. Let's pick up the rest of the story in Judges 7:16 down to 22. Dividing the 300 men into 3 companies, he placed trumpets and empty jars in the hands of all them with torches inside. "Watch me," he told them. "Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all round the camp blow yours and shout for the Lord and for Gideon." Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after they had changed the guard. They blew their trumpets and broke the jars that were in their hands. The 3 companies blew the trumpets and smashed the jars, grasping the torches in their left hands and holding in their right hands the trumpets they were to blow. They shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." While each man held his position round the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. When the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. And so the down that's gone up and gone down turns to the up again in this underdog story, even with the 300 being split further into groups of 100 men. Without even drawing a sword, without even carrying a sword. With only 300, and with trumpets and torches hidden in clay pots. Talk about faith and obedience. And with these crazy circumstances, they beat the Midianites. Encountering God when outnumbered, we realize it's not the outnumbered bit that we should focus on, but the God who looks at an army outnumbered by over 100,000 and says, "You've got too many." Being outnumbered, being small, being weak, being unimpressive isn't a fatal diagnosis. Because being outnumbered doesn't matter. Because it won't be us doing it, but God. And God reminds us, and he reminds, I think, the Israelites in Joel 2, 24 to 48. The threshing floors will be filled with grain. The vats will overflow with new wine and oil. The wine press will no longer be used for the threshing floor. It'll be used for crushing wine. The threshing floor will be back in the open where it belongs. I will repay you for the years the locusts have eaten. The great locust and the young locust, the other locust and the locust swarm. My great army that I sent among you. You will have plenty to eat until you are full, and you will praise the name of the Lord your God, who has worked wonders for you. Never again will my people be shamed. Then you will know that I am in Israel, that I am the Lord your God, and that there is no other. Never again will my people be shamed, and afterward I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy, your old men will dream dreams, your young men will see visions. I think this story of Gideon is such an encouragement to us, but it's a story that we need to constantly be reminded of, because the way that it works is not the way that the world works. And constantly the world is trying to shape us into its own pattern. Gideon needs to be reminded of this story, because the sadness is that the Israelites and Gideon forget, and they become overconfident. As we end this story on this high point, there's a slight warning for Gideon and for all of us to continue to be reminded, because after this, as we move on through his story, after this battle and after this victory, Gideon goes on this personal vendetta. He starts to lose his way. He commits these horrible acts. The people forget. In the next chapter, in chapter 8, verse 22, it says, the Israelites said to Gideon, rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us from the hand of Midian. You, Gideon, have saved us. Oh, how quickly we tend to forget. It wasn't Gideon at all. They want him to be their king, and he refuses, and he kind of refuses their request. But then he has a son, and he calls him Abimelech. And Abimelech, if you know, means my father is king. So maybe he didn't refuse them all that much. And he makes an idol from the gold that they win in battle. And after he dies, the Israelites worship it as God. And so as we are encouraged by this story of the God that we encounter when we are outnumbered, there is that reminder to constantly be reminded of it. Maybe for us, maybe for you, you've been focusing in life, there's been something where you've been focusing on the outnumbered bit, the overwhelmed bit, the against all odds bit. Maybe even for some of us, there's a little bit of pride. Are we willing to be weak? Are we willing to be unimpressive for God? The Bible constantly tells us that this is the posture and the position of those whose heart is right with God, that the followers of Jesus who are willing to be small in the world's view, then the conditions are right for God to work in and through us. And you might be feeling like that you are unimpressive, that you haven't got anything to give. There's that reminder to give with what's in your hands, as Emma shared last week of that reminder of the feeding of the 5,000 as they give with what is in their hands to Jesus. There's a reminder for us this morning that in the Israelites' hands are not swords and weapons and things of military might. They have trumpets and clay pots. And so for you this morning, you might be looking and thinking, all I've got in my hands are trumpets and clay pots. And God says, yes, offer them to me and see what I will do. Maybe for you, life has fallen apart. Maybe you're in a season of upheaval or feeling overwhelmed or feeling like Gideon, that you just don't know what has happened. Feeling completely overwhelmed. For you this morning, my prayer is that there will be that fresh revelation to see what God is doing in this moment. I'd encourage you to respond, getting on our knees in worship. It's in that place that we see the heavenly dynamics, the heavenly perspective of what God is doing. To be encouraged, to be comforted. Where is God shaping you and molding you? Have you been resisting it? Is there a season that God is preparing you, that God is growing you and building you up? Might be unglamorous, might be behind the scenes, might be that quiet inner place, the deep work, the slow work that God is doing in you. Are you leaning into it? That's what's so amazing about our year of prayer and fasting, those moments, and people are feeling that as they enter into it, of that work that God is doing, of preparing them and shaping them and molding them. How's your prayer life? And so I believe that we're in a season, and we've been going through a season like that at Mariners. And I believe that in the future that there is a time that God is preparing us for, where there will be fruitfulness, and we will enter into that moment. And in those moments there is that reminder and that warning to not become overconfident in ourselves. Perhaps that speaks to you today, of doing it in your own strength. In those moments we want to keep our focus on Jesus, to keep worshiping him. Keep our focus on him, to keep getting on our knees. We start in that place of crying out for help, getting on our knees in worship and prayer, and then we never move from there. Continuing on our knees in worship. And so as we come this morning to communion, in the bread and in the cup we receive, we're remembering that story of God with us in Jesus Christ. That he has not come to necessarily solve all of our problems, but far greater, to reconcile us to himself, to be in relationship with him, to be the God who is with us.